Welcome everyone to another CTC software webinar. My name is Sean Zerbis. I'm the Director of Development here at CTC Software. And today we're going to be continuing on the Nexus CMS Admin Learning Series, talking about how you can best leverage some of the search filtering, especially advanced search filtering. And we're going to talk a little bit today about how you can leverage these with saved searches as well, despite today not really being a saved search conversation. We're going to be using these in collaboration there, just so that you can see exactly how things are supposed to be working. Now, as always, these webinars are of course recorded. So if you want to come back to this in the future, you want to review this when you're actually going through the steps, by all means, this will be up on our YouTube channel. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube and you find this useful, we hope that it earns a like and a subscribe from you. That just helps everybody in the community be able to get access to these styles of videos from CTC Software. Also, as always, if you're participating with us live today, we do keep our eye on that questions window. So please go ahead and open that up. And if you have a question, type it out. We will try to answer that live while we're talking about a topic, but we also save a QA session for the end. So those of you who are joining us live, stick around for that as well, in case you want to save your questions for the end session. Without further ado, let's jump right into the topic today. So here's the deal. Sometimes, pretty much in any environment, when you're doing some kind of filtering, just basic filtering really isn't enough. And the CMS does have some powerful basic filtering, but sometimes you want to get just a little bit more advanced. And so the filter panel has some really good controls that maybe are a little more admin specific. And so we're going to talk about some of those. We're going to talk about some of the basic filtration as well, some of the more advanced filtration, some of that which might be more useful to you as CMS admins. But we're also going to talk about how you can leverage some of this and some strategies with filtration within your saved searches so that you can actually distribute some of these more advanced features that your end users might not fully understand or might not be able to navigate through on a regular basis. You can distribute that to them as a saved search. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So we are going to go in detail through all of the filtration criteria that is available within the CMS environment. We are going to leverage some of those filters so that we can better understand our content and be able to use this in our searches as admins, but also be able to pass some of that benefit on to our end users. And that's where the advanced filters come in with saved searches. So we can make these types of things repeatable, because the last thing you want to do is have to rebuild a search filter every single time and remember how you set that up last time. And then again, we're going to be talking about a few other advanced options that you can tie in, just some strategies that you can leverage for best practices as it relates to save searches and partnering this up with your end users. So quite a few little conversation talking points here today. First of all, though, let's jump in and talk about the filtering criteria. Now, at this point in our series, we're kind of expecting that you've been following along and you know what some of the terminologies are that we're going to be using here. Things like talking about the portal, things like looking within the CMS and opening up the filters panel and pinning it open. But if you don't, I'll try to recap a couple of things here and there where it's relevant. So within the CMS itself, I have this opened up here. I'm in the latest version that's available for the CMS right now, which is, I think, 25.5. I think that's what I have on my machine at the moment. And with that, if I go to search, and within search, you don't see the filters panel, well, as admins, all of you should always see the filters panel all the time. And so I'm going to open up my filters panel and I'm going to pin it on screen so this filters panel stays out 100% of the time. Depending on how much you use this panel, you may have different aspects of this expanded or collapsed. But our goal here is to talk through each of the individual components within this filters panel so you know exactly what each individual thing means and then we'll give some examples of how some of this might be useful. So first off, of course, there's libraries. Libraries is your list of your private libraries that you have internally, but you also have access to public libraries for those that are available. And in both cases, your libraries and your public libraries, you can do things like pinning certain things to the top to make them easier to navigate. We talked about some of these things in the user learning series, but also this can be beneficial for you as admins. And within the filtration controls, you can do some filtration of the libraries themselves by typing something out here. You can also do stuff like refreshing which libraries happen to be available. You can check all if you want to, or you can uncheck all, which is probably the most useful if you're checking a few things and you want to clear that out. The uncheck all is the quick way to do that. And you'll see this type of functionality across all of our filter dropdowns pretty much, where there's more than like 2 or 3 filter options in the list. Moving down a little bit, we have, of course, the tags. So if you are using tagging in your Nexus CMS filtration strategies, that's fantastic. Within the tags list, you will see any of the filters that are actively applied to content that you have access to. This won't show any filters that you have made but have not yet associated. If you want to know more about tagging and tag association, we've already got a webinar on that that's up, so you can go ahead and take a look at that if you want to know more about how these filters get applied, how you author them. But within your filters panel, when they're applied, they can show up here. And just like with libraries, you can filter these down. There's a lot of times when this list can get quite long depending on what you have available to you. And so I like using good quality naming conventions here. So if I wanted to only find certain specific tags, I can quickly filter for that and use those. This will be a part of your advanced strategy in the future when you're navigating through this list. So be clean about your tag naming, be clean about your library naming. Both of those will help you with filtering. Now again, here, if you make new tags or associate new tags, you can always refresh this list. You can do a check all, though it's technically unnecessary if you're not actually actively using specific tags or not actively using specific libraries. Generally, the CMS will search all of it anyway, so the check all is kind of unnecessary, but the check none is quite good. So unchecking all is pretty meaningful here. If you had gone through and checked a few things and maybe removed your filter instead of trying to navigate through a long list of tags, if you have a bunch, to uncheck some things, the uncheck all just is a quick, good quality shortcut. Now, specifically with tags, this is something that I really like to use. You have this option here for contains all tags, i.e. all that you have checked. So if I check 2 things and I check this as well, then when I apply this and it pulls up some search criteria, some search results rather, it will make sure that both this, in this case, MEP settings tag and the MEP template tag were both applied to content, or it will not show it in the result list. So you can use this as a strategy. I know some of you have, for example, up in your architectural, let's just put doors here. There we go. So I've got commercial doors that are double doors, right? I can use these to really help me refine. It has to be both commercial and double if I have contains all tags checked. And that way it'll give me the few items that kind of match that criteria. It's a good, powerful way of bringing up some very refined search results. Now you can also find, let me uncheck all of this, anything in your library that's not tagged. And when you do this option, you'll notice the tags dropdown actually disappears from the user interface when you're doing not tagged. So if you were trying to find something in a specific library, perhaps that was not tagged, this might be a really good way to find that. And then perhaps you subsequently go and apply specific tags to things. I know a lot of my customers have certain rules in their library that everything must be tagged in some kind of specific way in addition to the library association, in addition to the properties that are applied. And this is a good way to discover where perhaps that type of rule is not met, especially for new content. The next option down can be really meaningful for how the result set is presented to you. By default, most of us have the sort by set to relevance. That's just the default option for pretty much every user account. Out of the box, the default is relevance. Now you can change your default. Your end users, they can change their default by going into your user settings and changing what your default sort by method is. In my case, mine is set to sort by name. We'll come back and talk about this a little later on, because sometimes you might want to intentionally change the sort by, maybe not your default, but you might want to change the sort by option for different reasons. Now, with the sort by, in my case, mine is set to name, and when I first open up the CMS, it defaults to name. And if I change it to something else and then I clear my filters, I have some filters set right now. If I clear those filters, that normally will get reset back to my default search set, my default option here. And so in this case, mine didn't, whatever, doesn't matter. Normally that clear will get reset back to whatever your default option is. Okay, let's expand down to the next section here. If you're dealing with Revit and you're not a Civil 3D user, we'll get to Civil 3D stuff here in a moment, or AutoCAD stuff in a moment, but if you're a Revit-centric user, then you can expand out these Revit filters and use these in collaboration with your active design app of Revit. So you can force the search results to only show you Revit content. This can be very meaningful when you're in the Revit environment trying to search for content. Probably at that point, you only care about Revit content. This is also really meaningful for libraries that have mixed content in them. For example, in my library templates, I have Word document templates, as well as Excel templates, PowerPoint templates, AutoCAD templates, Revit templates. And so I'll use the term lazily, I can easily also just check the box for templates, check the box for only Revit content, and when I hit apply, I will only get my Revit content out of that library. The CMS understands exactly what content is Revit-centric versus AutoCAD-centric. If I uncheck the only Revit content, you'll see I have quite a bit inside of here that are template-based files, DWTs, other things that exist inside of here, some things that accidentally looks like they were organized inside of my library system. I'll fix that later. But the whole point is that I can quickly filter down to just my Revit content here and easily get templates that are Revit for my users in this case. You can also force showing incompatible version content. This can be meaningful sometimes, especially as admins when you're going through and verifying if something actually exists. Normally, like when I'm within Revit, Revit's very version specific. I cannot load future content into my 2023 session if it was saved in 24 or 25 or 26. So this will allow me to at least see, even if I have Revit 23 open, other stuff that might appear in this environment that is future, that is not of the current version. Like I can see my 2024 template here, but notice how when I mouse over a 21, 22, or 23 template, it gives me the load option. But when I mouse over the 24 option, that doesn't exist. It automatically turns that off. It'll show me the result. I can visually see it as an admin to validate something is there, but it might be incompatible with my current Revit version. So sometimes you might find that meaningful when you're running searches. And that also works, as you can see here with this particular library where I have some more incorrectly libraried or categorized content here. It's showing me other future content as well in here, even though this technically is not templates. And apparently it's on me that this happened. So, my own fault. I didn't clean up after a test that I was doing. But it's easy to find that kind of stuff. All right, let's clear these settings back out again. There is also over here, of course, Revit categories. And this will show you every single Revit category that has been processed into the CMS that you have access to. So if you are an architecture firm and you perhaps are not processing in things like air terminals and air terminal tags. It's not available to you. It's not in your libraries. You won't see these things within your Revit categories list. This list dynamically updates based on what you actively have access to in your CMS environment. Now, if you're using the public libraries, if that's something that you have turned on and you can see any of this stuff, then you'll probably always see all Revit categories because the public libraries probably contain everything. But if you're not using the public libraries, then this list will exclusively be what you have processed in as admins for your internal content. And it will continue to expand as you process in more and more and more categories. Similarly here, there is display units, imperial versus metric. And once again, just pointing out each of these drop-down lists, they all have this filter option and they have this check all, check none, and refresh option. Now for display units, it's kind of silly to have it there. It's unnecessary. You will only ever have imperial or metric in this list. But certainly you can leverage that still to uncheck all. If you're just going through and being like, uncheck all, you can just hit each list and do that intentionally down, and that'll include display units, even though, again, technically it's only 2 items, and you'll only usually have one or the other checked, if anything at all. But this will help it filter down to discrete units of measure so that maybe you have a mixed environment where you have some metric and you have some imperial, and you only want to see imperial maybe when you're working in the United States, and maybe when you're working anywhere else in the world that knows how to actually use proper units of measure, maybe you filter out the imperial rubbish and you only use metric. Whatever your opinion is on that, it is what it is. But you can easily kind of filter that stuff down. Now again, very Revit centric, this particular filter. You can filter down to specific types of hosting, specific hosting. So like maybe you've got ceiling content or face-based object, unhosted objects, wall-hosted objects. Maybe you've got roof-based or floor-based. Now in my libraries, I don't have any roof-based objects or floor-based objects, so they're not showing up in this hosting list. Again, kind of speaks to the dynamic nature of how these lists are presented. But within this list, or certainly a not applicable where it's not even Revit content, you could potentially use. That's kind of an odd one to potentially use, but these other ones that are named, you can definitely use those. So if you're only seeking out face-based content, maybe a lighting fixture, and you don't want ceiling hosted lighting fixtures, you want face-based lighting fixtures compatible with Revit MEP, this could be a valid way of achieving that by just choosing face-based. So a filter that's not used a ton by a lot of people, but if you're an MEP, man, this can really be a savior when you're looking for specific content that you can actually use. There's also version-specific filtration, and this will show you all of the Revit version content that you have access to within your libraries as well. So you can filter down and say, I'm in 23, maybe I only want content that is exclusively 2023. Maybe I don't want any of the older content at all. I can exclusively limit that down. So when I apply this, my amount of content that I'm getting will be significantly shorter because it'll only be giving me Revit 2023 content, and specifically in this case, only Revit content as well. So it's actually filtering out Word documents and things that wouldn't have a version that could be filtered here as well. So that's kind of the big part here of the Revit filtration. Let's move down into the AutoCAD filtration. So similar to the Revit side, there is an only AutoCAD content option here. Now, since we're talking about the second only design app feature, let's take a look at what happens if you have more than one area here expanded. If I choose only Revit content while the AutoCAD filters are expanded, notice how even though it's expanded, it doesn't show me those options because I can't do anything with them anyway. It's only going to present me Revit content. And if I check the only AutoCAD content while the Revit filters are expanded, it kind of hides all of those features because those are no longer relevant when I'm exclusively showing AutoCAD content. So depending on how you're establishing your searches, that can be quite meaningful and can help you sort of declutter some of the UI, both in the filters panel, but also in the search results that ultimately show up, because it's going to be limited down to things that are AutoCAD content exclusively. Let me collapse the Revit intentionally here. Within the AutoCAD categories area, just like with the Revit categories area, of course, you're going to have all the different things that could be potentially hosted that you have already processed into your libraries. Now, I have quite a few things that I've processed into my libraries, everything from basic AutoCAD blocks and basic AutoCAD drawings that might contain details in my templates, but you can also process in things like Lisp routines. You can process in AutoCAD scripts, .scr files. You can process in things like AutoCAD sheet set templates, so you can have that available. Text styles, dimension styles, a bunch of content that would just be core AutoCAD standards. Now, in addition to that, of course, you've got everything pretty much that you can do in Civil 3D. So stuff like your custom subassemblies and assemblies, stuff like alignment styles, label styles, text styles, table types, for all of the different categories that could potentially be inside the Civil 3D interface. That's what I have currently in my environment. So you can filter and cross-filter all of this and kind of really limit this down to discrete categories that you're trying to find. Now, one thing about the Revit categories filter here for the Revit categories and for the AutoCAD categories is if you check more than one, it is an OR filter. So I could say, give me things that are label styles that relate to quarter points, or label styles that relate to grade breaks, or label styles that relate to label sets. And I could get all three of those result sets back in my results window when I actually run some kind of a search. And again, I probably should say only AutoCAD content, so I can filter out the document files that aren't necessarily relevant. And here I'm finding the 12 things that are specifically one of those three categories. And of course, I can further filter that down with general searching as well. And of course, just like before, I can uncheck all. And just like before, if I was looking for something that was discretely maybe alignment, I can type in align and get my list to be much more manageable here to find the alignment stuff that I'm looking for. Maybe specifically alignment styles here in this case. And then as I apply, I get discretely those alignment styles that can be loaded into my active drawing environment. So definitely be leveraging the category filters. The nice thing about the category filters, by the way, for both Revit categories and AutoCAD categories is there is nothing at all that you have to do to make those function. In fact, everything that's within the AutoCAD filters section and everything that is within the Revit filters section, there is nothing special you have to do to get these to apply to your content. It just automatically applies because a Revit category is a piece of metadata that exists. An AutoCAD category or style is something that automatically persists. The display units are in the content and we read that out. The hosting type is in the content. You don't have to specify something to be that. The Revit version, that is just automatic. All of this is automatic. The only thing that is sort of manual that you can associate or need to associate if you want to use it would be things like tagging and or the library buckets your content is placed within. Those are the only two manual pieces. Everything else that we're talking about here about these filters, 100% automatic. All you have to do is processing your content and all of these will take effect. And that actually is one reason why many of our customers find they don't need to leverage this tagging in super complicated ways in a lot of cases, because most of those properties for both Revit filters and the AutoCAD filters, 100% automatic. So let's get into the final section here, the advanced filters, filters that most users of the CMS probably are never going to use. One of them is file extension filtration. If you're trying to track down every DOC file or DOCX file that exists in your library, you can absolutely do that. This will give me, in my case, the 65 items that are either a document or a document X. So this can be a really powerful way for filtering down to things that don't have specific design app filters like Revit content or AutoCAD content, or even within Revit content, maybe I want to specifically find RVT content or RFA content or RTE content, right? I can use the Revit filters in collaboration with file extensions or the AutoCAD filters in relation with the file extensions to really narrow down to something very specific. I'm looking for a .bat file or a .scr file or something. You can really limit this down to exactly what you're seeking. okay? So this will let you get to anything that is stored in the database by a specific file extension. Pretty much everything will have a file extension, and this will help you discover that. You also have here the ability to filter out content that doesn't meet a minimum rating. So if I said it has to have at least 1 star of rating, not 0 star, but 1 star of rating, I can apply that, and this will find me anything across all of my, I probably should clear my settings first. Let's clear everything out and then go minimum of 1 star rating. Okay, here we go. So that's gonna find me some, in this case, Revit content that has been rated by a customer. Somebody has interacted with this content and done some kind of a review on it. And you can, as admins, go take a look at the detail of that and understand what that review happens to be and what the rating of that content happens to be. Now, this happens to be 5-star rated content, and I could filter out further stuff that wasn't 5-star rated pretty easily as well by simply raising up what that minimum rating should be and reapplying my search. And I can find the content that's rubbish that way, or content that's really, really good that way. Now, again, this filters out anything that has absolutely no rating. So most of my library right now is unrated. Now, if you want to go beyond that, using some advanced, even more advanced filtration for some like review or planning for how your content's going to be maintained, you can take a look at our analytics series that helps you dig even deeper. But just live here in the content system, you can do some filtering for at least a minimum rating of something. You also have a series of date filters down here. When content was added, like the starting of that or the ending of that, so stuff that maybe was all added back in 2019, I can say from January 1st to December 31st of 2019, give me just that content. Or stuff that's been updated in a specific date range, stuff that's been updated this year, stuff that was updated last year. I can use these updated start and end dates to help me discover content perhaps that hasn't been modified in a while. Maybe I want to just use the end date and say anything that hasn't been modified since December 31st of 2023. Maybe I want to take a look at that content and do something with it. So I can take my updated end date, set that as a filter, and find all the content that hasn't been touched in a minute. And then I can maybe make an action plan myself as an admin. You see, these are things that end users are probably not going to be using very regularly, but you as the CMS admins, you may care about that. And you might be leveraging this in collaboration with some of these other filters, like all of the stuff in a certain library that hasn't been touched for a certain amount of time. Find that out. And then maybe you have a maintenance plan or an action plan to fix that. You can also discover stuff that was added by discrete users and or updated by some users. Maybe you had a team member who recently left and you want to see all the stuff that they were recently updating. You could use the updated by that username and leverage that in a filter to kind of find all the content that they were maintaining, so you can assign that to somebody else, or content that was added by that person and maybe hasn't been maintained in a long while. Maybe then you take that and assign that to somebody on your team to let them continue to maintain that content. And this can help you discover a lot of that and have it immediately show up in the search results. Maybe somebody was just adding a piece of content and you want to find out what that was, or updating a piece of content. You want to find out when that gets put in there. I can put in their username here as the updated by, and then run searches on some whatever interval I want and find that content when it makes its way into the system. Make sure that it got added in the correct version of Revit even potentially. Maybe they were doing their edits in 25, but I was expecting that content to show up in 2023 or 2020 or something like that. This might be a great area where, again, I might combine the display incompatible versions alongside the find who was updating something. So I can see like, oh, Adam on my team did this update. And even though it's not compatible with the current version of Revit that I'm in, I can still leverage and find that content to see when it got put in there, so I can potentially recommend another team member be able to find it in a similar fashion, or some criteria that would let them search for that type of content. Now, everything that I was talking about here in filters, and technically everything that we talked about in the search strings in the user learning series for advanced searches, you can save all of this criteria, including search strings, and you can do that in different strategic ways. So let's talk about actively using these advanced filters in some interesting way that might be beneficial to us. One example, maybe I'm looking for all of the content in my Revit library. There's 818 items. Actually, let's clear this out so I have no extra filters for right now. My Revit library. So I've got 817 objects in this case. Maybe I am very intentionally looking for only Revit content. That might be a good thing to use. Find me that. Okay, so still 817 because this is my Revit content library. That helps me visually validate that I didn't accidentally have Word document content or other non-Revit content in my Revit library. Somebody didn't screw up on that front, or I should say I didn't screw up on that front and accidentally misassociate something. I can also tell this to display some incompatible versions, and in this case, there's one extra piece of content that shows up. And for right now, the way that this is sorted, it's all sorted by name, so it's alphabetically sorted. And that usually works pretty well, unless I'm intentionally searching for something up here. Say I search for swing single, and I capitalize the I, but it doesn't matter. Alphabetic searching in this case isn't great. This would be like if you were up on Google and you were searching Google and it gave you back the result set based on alphabetic names of pages. Not really very meaningful. You probably want to go in there and have it set up such that, like, when I search Olympic fencing, it gives me back something interesting related to Olympic fencing, as opposed to the stealing and reselling of objects illegally, right? So I want to make sure that it's not just alphabetical all the time. Maybe I want something when I put in a search criteria for it to show me the relevance to that. And that's going to change the order in which my content shows up. Swing single here shows me a piece of content whose name is swing single. It floats it to the top of the list. This is definitely not alphabetic. It's the same result set, but the difference is when I'm over here in my filters panel, having it sort by name, that swing single, that's way down here at the bottom of my list. So that's not very convenient for an end user. So you may very well, when you have intention of using the search bar up here to type something in as a part of your search in collaboration, you may want the sort by to very intentionally be relevant. Well, that's great. You can have that strategically set up in your saved search that we're about to get to when you're using this. So leverage this filters panel to update things like sort by so that it's more meaningful for you. Maybe you're looking for single doors, but you're looking for things based on the when it was added or when it was last updated. I want to find the swing single content that's in here, but I want to find the stuff that was added the most recently. So most recent stuff shows at the top. Oldest, last updated stuff shows up further down the list. This could be good for an action plan for how you want to continue to maintain your content. Stuff at the end of the list are things that you want to work on sooner, right? So leverage these types of filters over here for your own benefits. And you can leverage these specifically in saved searches. So saved searches are really powerful as well, because now when you're doing something very similar over and over and over again, you don't have to keep coming over here and setting a library and modifying your sort by if it's something that you're doing specifically over and over again, and only displaying Revit content and incompatible versions and maybe certain units of measure. Maybe I want to change that to, just imperial, and maybe, I don't know, I want to filter it down to a specific Revit version, like my current Revit version. Well, there's only 2 pieces of content then in that case. This helps me really narrow this down when I'm looking for something that's swing single in my library. That's only Revit content, that's imperial, that's got Revit version 23 associated to it, right? So I don't want to have to set this every single time though. So I may very well save this for my own personal continued ongoing uses. Now I want to show something else, because we're going to now start talking about advanced strategies, and I'm actually going to save a few searches and show you what the result of this happens to be, and then we'll go into Q&A. So in the advanced strategies here, I'm going to pull up the portal. This particular advanced strategy applies most specifically to Revit users. You can have this set to auto filter for the active design app version And in collaboration with that, you can have it automatically update your search results to match whatever design app you happen to be in. Let me give you an example of how this stuff works together. And this is best, by the way, when you are cloud caching your content, because that facilitates you leveraging automatic Revit content upgrades. So this way, when you process a piece of content in, say in Revit 2021, it can automatically upgrade if it's cloud hosted to future Revit versions. And that kind of helps make this much, much more valuable. I'm going to save these settings for right now. I'm going to go over into the CMS and I'm going to close the CMS and I'm going to intentionally now reopen it. So here again, we're talking about some advanced strategies. I'm just waiting for the CMS to reopen here on my computer. Once I closed it and reopened it, I'm doing the close and reopen on purpose so that it repulls those cloud settings into my current session. So I can show you a little bit of what that design app version switching actually means. Okay, and I'm going to pin the CMS to the foreground so it can't get hidden by something else. So here, remember, I have Revit 2023 as my active design app version. And I'm going to clear my settings, clear all search filters here in this case. And when I clear that, notice how the version Revit 2023 shows up. I'm going to tell this to only show me Revit content and I'm going to hit apply. So this is all libraries, 3,440 items that show up for Revit version 23. This is not showing incompatible now. This is only showing me stuff that has a Revit 2023 record associated to it. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch my design app from Revit 23 to Revit 2025, which I also happen to have open here. And when I actually activate Revit 2025, assuming I have the Nexus CMS associated there, no, it appears I don't. That's fantastic. Let's try opening up Revit 24. We'll come back to the 25 here in a minute, perhaps, or back to Revit 23 in a minute. But I want to show that this is actively tying in to that design app. By the way, just so y'all know, I am actively doing testing on some future stuff, and I have the CMS environment turned off in 25, I believe, for now, which is why it's not showing up on this list. So we'll open up 24 where I'm not doing testing. We'll get this to refresh here in a moment once Revit continues to open itself up. But the whole point here is that this will refresh the versions down here and it will rerun my search from the 3,400 elements and give me some different number. So in this case, when I click over into Revit 24, notice how the design app updates itself. The 3,400 objects that I had before now shows up as 5,200 Revit elements inside of here that are available to me. It's doing this because as I'm switching between design apps, it's automatically updating my versions down here and it's automatically reapplying all the rest of my search criteria. So if I switch back over to Revit 23, it's going to rerun that search and give me my updated search results. This can be kind of interesting here. Let's just say I do swing here in my search. Let's not use the asterisk there. I don't need to use the asterisk. 16 items in Revit 23 related to swing. And if I click back over to Revit 2024, it's going to rerun my search. And now there's 84 items that are related to swing. This is an automatic thing. You don't have to switch a design app and manually hit apply. Neither do your users in this case. It will automatically find the Revit version content that is most relevant. Now I mentioned this because you need to understand how this directly applies. This advanced filtration that we just did here that's automatically updating your version switching has a ramification on your saved searches. If I save a search right now, let's just say I make a brand new search and call this swing, put my name in front of this here, SCZ swing 24, because this is specifically filtering for 2024. I'm going to save this. This isn't shared with my organization. This is just my own personal search. Say I jump back into Revit 2023 over here. It's going to rerun my search. It's the same thing, swing, but it's specifically targeting Revit 2023. Now, if I go into my saved searches and I go find my swing 24 and run that search, even though I have turned on in my main settings the version switching automatically, and it will switch automatically. If I go over into Revit 24, it'll rerun that. If I come back to Revit 23, it'll rerun that back to 23, but the initial run is not picking up on my Revit version when I first run it, because I saved discretely Revit 24, version 24 in my save search result, in my save search criteria. So one strategy that you may very well want to make sure you implement is, if you are leveraging that automatically set design version, that's fine. Just make sure before you save your search, you have nothing set. Hit apply, it'll have nothing set, and then go back and save. I'm gonna overwrite that 24 here and resave this. Now, when I run that criteria and I'm in Revit 23, if I go ahead and say run that SCZ swing here, it's going to make that automatic version association take effect and put Revit 23 on it for me. This becomes an automatic passive thing. And now as I'm doing things like switching to 2024, it'll go, hey, cool, I'm gonna update your search to 24. Or if I clear all my criteria out and I tell this to go ahead and use that swing, it'll not be discretely setting a version. It'll just go, yeah, no, that's cool. It's whatever version is active. But that's because of how I specifically strategically set up my search criteria and filters before I actually saved my search. So I can take advantage of the automatic version switching, okay? This is specific again to Revit. So one small thing that you might choose to do with that for an automatic search. You can also, by the way, force the sort by. You can force this in your search criteria as well, which might be meaningful. So there are times, again, where I'm sorting by name by default. Let me see if I can go find one here. I have like my MEP mechanical collection here. Now that one's still sorting by name. MEP details. Okay, also sorting by name. Sometimes, I may very well want to force the sort by to be by relevance, where I expect the user to further leverage the search criteria up here. And so say I wanted to update that search that I just did to relevance. And again, I'm not forcing a specific Revit version year, so I'm choosing to not have that set when I hit apply here. Now, when I save that, that was for my details, my MEP details. So I'm gonna go ahead and choose that one. This is, by the way, a shared search with my organization. So this is affecting multiple people on my team. I'm gonna go ahead and save this, overwrite that. And now when I run, say, my mechanical one, it forces the sort by name. It automatically filters to my active Revit version year. And when I go back to my details, where I'm expecting people to actually modify the search string on the top, it force sets it back to relevance. And again, it sets my version year because that wasn't saved in the criteria, and my rules for my organization are taking over. And now when a user goes up here and types in something like Ballard or something, it's going to show the most relevant component first, not just alphabetically listed, because I've told it to sort by relevance. So there's a series of strategies that you can use here in the filters, and combining that alongside the saved searches, so you can really make the CMS very useful for your team. Now, if your users do not have the filters panel open and you run one of those saved searches, it still does the same thing. So if I did MEP mechanical, it is forcing the alphabetical, it is filtering it down discretely to 23. It's only finding things with mechanical categories on it, and they can run a search like diffuser, and it'll find me things, but it's going to alphabetically sort this list, 100% alphabetic. Versus if I go to details, again, version year filter takes effect, but it's sorting by relevance. And if I put diffuser here, This will be sorted by the most relevant items first, not necessarily just alphabetic sorting, okay? So that can give you quite a bit of power even if your users are not showing the filters panel. All right, I've gone through quite a lot of detail here. Let's unpin this from the foreground. I've gone through quite a bit of detail, and we hope that this helps you leverage the search filtration in really powerful ways within your firm, especially those of you in the administration part. You might be leveraging this even more than your users to help you better manage your content, but you're also going to be needing to use this in ways that benefits your users directly in your saved searches. So hopefully this helps you out a lot. So for those of you watching this as a recording, I'm going to go ahead and say thank you. We hope you found this really valuable. And if so, hopefully, again, it earns from you a like and a subscribe here on the YouTube channel. We hope to see you back here on the YouTube channel and future uploads that we've got. That subscribe will let you know.